It's a more laid back episode since it was intended to be me, Michael, and Chris, but here in the smoke filled room, we couldn't just have just us with so much going on, or maybe not going on down in Springfield. We asked our buddy Patrick Fingston to also join us. So I'd still like to keep more of that laid back vibe. So if you all wanted to rib each other and have some fun in this episode, let's try to do that. But there's a lot going on in Springfield as we were developing the agenda for this episode. There's only a little politics to talk this week. There's a lot of Springfield to talk. So Patrick, thanks for taking the time to join us. By ways of introduction, you're the main man of the Illinois. You're also a morning show host for WMAY. You've got a podcast. You've got a lot of stuff going on. Honestly, I don't know when you sleep, but I'm glad you found time to join us.
Add the two kids on top of that, and
Yeah.
it's even more wild. Gentlemen and Chris, a pleasure to be here.
We, of course, as always, well, not this month, but usually, as always, we've got Michael, we've got Chris. Guys, I know you weren't happy, especially you, Michael, about missing last week. So glad you guys could get on this week to give your thoughts.
No, it's good to be here. A lot to talk about, obviously, with all the shenanigans in Springfield.
The
You know, I
shenanigans.
I think that the universe just doesn't like me because I get back from my vacation last week and I had a wisdom tooth erupt. So I'm in immense pain right now in my mouth. So that's not going to affect my way of saying anything differently than I would have anyway, because Lord knows there's always shit coming out of my mouth. So what's going to change now with a wisdom tooth, you
What's
know?
I've never heard of that. A wisdom tooth eruption? What does that
It's
even
like
mean?
that's where like it just like pops up through the gums, like out of nowhere.
Like you didn't have it and then it came up?
Yeah, it's supposed to
You still
happen
had
like
you still had baby teeth?
it's supposed to happen to everybody between the ages of 17 and 25, and I get it when I'm 25, so it's a fun week for me.
Baby tooth Chris. I also Abby told me that while you were in Washington, you didn't even go see like the coolest thing you could have gone to see in Washington because you couldn't convince your friends to go see it.
No, I wanted to go to Mount St. Helens in Washington, and
Yeah.
we didn't. We saw Mount Rainier, that was cool. We went to
Well, you can't. How are
Olympic.
you that close and not going to see St. Helens?
I, I was not in charge of this trip.
All I'm saying is when I heard that as your employer, I was a little bit disappointed because if you can't even convince a group of friends to go see something that cool, how are you ever going to convince a voter to change their vote? This called into question your persuasive abilities.
Colin, if you met the stubborn morons that are my friends, you might understand a little bit better.
I guess I should just copy paste Chris and assume they're all just little Chris's. Is that what I should
No,
assume?
no, not at all. Not at all.
All right, well, let's get into what is or isn't happening in Springfield. We'll start with the budget. As we record this, I want to remind people we record this Thursday afternoon. So, right now, as we're doing this, we're 57 hours before the at least scheduled deadline for session. So, anything's going to happen. By the time you listen to this or watch this on Friday or over the weekend, a lot of stuff that we talk about might be obsolete. So we're going to do our best not to do that, not to waste your time. We'll give you a few developments as we know it here on Thursday, but mostly we're going to focus on the analysis and what things mean, things that, you can take to heart even after different news breaks on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. So, Patrick, with you being down there in the front lines, as of Thursday afternoon, where are we? It sounds like we've got no budget and no one knows what the hell is going on other than a select few.
Well, let me start by saying it's a pretty good time to subscribe to the Illinois newsletter at theillinois.com. The second thing I'll say is, yeah, I mean, if people know what's going on, it is a very select few, and they are not rank and file members on either side of the aisle. I even saw Cam Buckner last night after the House adjourned after 9 o'clock or whatever it was, who's the new House Democrat budgeteer, one of them, and he kind of just shrugged at me like, I don't know, man. So I get this sense, and nobody really knows a lot after. I mean, they were still in caucus when I left the state house this afternoon. Um, I don't think there's a deal anywhere, at least not yet. And I think the governor on Wednesday threw a wrench into things by broadly declaring his opposition to the most likely tax increases that could pass, and tax increases that a lot of his Democratic members want to pass. So it was, I think that added a wrinkle into the complication, though theoretically his people are still saying that in budget negotiations anyway. So that's probably not news in the room, but it was news to us because Pritzker hasn't really said anything about the budget in the last month. So I think there are a lot of questions right now, going into the weekend, as we're what is it? Sometime Thursday afternoon. The days are kind of running
Who
together
the
at
hell
this
knows?
point. So maybe they're close, but everything we've been told is that there's still a wide chasm between how they're going to close this gap, because you've got Democrats who've been given laundry lists of tax increases that they can't find broad-based support for, and you've got Democrats and a governor who don't want to cut
Mhm.
more state spending. So they're sort of
And
at
you've got
a
groups who want to add more state spending.
Oh, certainly. And that, I mean, that's I've often told the story of the progressive that told me a few weeks ago that, you know, voters sent us super majorities in both chambers to spend more and do more to help people and not
Mhm.
enact an austerity budget, right? So there are certainly Democrats that believe that it's their calling, it's their job to go and do more. So it's a real impasse.
You know, Patrick, you mentioned what Pritzker brought up about, not being for any broad taxes. So income tax increases, business tax, income tax increases, or sales tax expansion, or whatever they call that. What I thought was interesting is the rush of people to sort of, it was almost clear they were trying to convince, like Rich Miller on Cat Facts, trying to convince Democrats, no, 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 don't do this. Don't do this. Because it's clear, like I've heard from a lot of people that the sales tax expansion has been on the table for a while now, and that actually Democrats aren't that opposed to it. But then you have people like Miller, like Pritzker, and others who are like, no, 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 we're none of us are for this. It's like actually that's not true, but it seems like they're saying it so strongly just to try to convince their caucus, please don't do this, because they know. I mean, politically, it's certainly not going to be overly popular, and clearly they know that. But does it come across that way to you too?
Well, we should also mention it looks like there's a sales tax increase to a point in the Senate transportation
Yep, which we'll talk about
mass
that very quick.
transit bill, which I'm sure we'll get to. I think it's pretty clear. And listen, I know you guys are completely opposed to him in every way. I have very big ideological differences, but JB Pritzker is really good at this, especially in terms of the messaging and the politics. And he knows with his presidential ambitions, he knows with the way things pull and the way things play and the people he's got working with him, that increasing taxes right now spells doom for them. Especially after, I mean, they saw what cost of living did to Democrats, including Illinois, where they should have won seats last year in the legislative races, not congressional races, because they've already maxed those out thanks to gerrymandering. So they've you can even see what Democratic inflation, what was hooked to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and in turn every Democrat across the country did. So they're not stupid. They see that, hey, if we go and increase taxes, whether it's a sales tax, whether it's an income tax, whether it's a corporate income tax that impacts every mom and pop business around the state, that they will get hammered for it in the next election.
But at what point, and I guess I'll throw this over to Michael and Chris, so it's not just me and Patrick having a conversation, but like at what point do you sort of wonder, are they gonna like I'm just gonna say it, are they gonna grow some cojones? Are they gonna like actually step up and govern and lead? Because it seems like every year it's like, well, what's the least unpopular thing we can do to sort of duct tape together this budget? But you've got a super majority in both the House and the Senate if you're the Democrats. Like at what point are you like, you know what, maybe we'll do something slightly unpopular that we know structurally could, would help the budget or whatever it might be. Like every year we have this, like, oh, we're so afraid we'll get hammered if we do X. It's like, okay, but you have significant majorities in the House and Senate. You're good. You could lose a few seats and you'd still be in the super majority. Like, is it just, are they that tentative permanently? I mean, Chris, I know you've got thoughts on this.
Well, I've said before many a times that the Democrats are constantly convinced that they're on the precipice of losing everything in the state of Illinois if the Republican Party ever got its crap together. And that's true. Like there are deep blue state senators and state representatives that if they draw a Republican opponent start freaking out. They're in a D plus 30 seat and they start freaking out. It's like, I have a challenger. I'm gonna lose now. It's like that's not and you and I and sane people, we recognize that, like, no, you're not going to lose if you have a Republican challenger in a D plus 30 seat. But the Democratic Party is constantly on edge that could somehow lose its grip on power in this state. And I agree with you, Colin. I mean, with a super duper majority in both houses, it would make more sense for them to put some people on some, like, they've got enough people in safe seats to where they can have them vote for legislation that may be slightly unpopular to get through this budgeting process. But it doesn't seem like they want to do that right now. Or perhaps there's just not, there really isn't any, even from a ideological perspective, there really isn't that much stomach for these tax increases. Um, so I don't know where it's going to go, but it's certainly telling that Democrats are playing this really, really like slowly politically when they really could take a risk here on this budget and probably get away with it.
Well, and that's the point. 2026 is, at least at the moment, projected to be tough for Republicans. If there's ever a year that the Democrats could get away with something, I'm not saying I would be for this. I'm not saying they should do this. But if they truly believe that this budget needs more revenue, which, again, I have big qualms about, but if they truly believe the state needs more revenue and that that's the problem, this is the year to push forward a progressive tax, raise the income tax, expand the sales tax. I don't know. This is the year to do those structural reforms that, the Civic Club or whatever it is, and all those groups have been begging them to do for years, because this is when you'd face the least amount of problems other than Pritzker. Other than Pritzker's national ambitions for the state Democrats, this would be the year to grow a backbone if you truly believe the state needs more revenue. And yet again, we're seeing the same sort of pansy approach of, oh no, I might anger two people.
But it goes
Well, and
back
I
to the
was
old,
reading,
adage of 60,
sorry.
30, and 1, right? I mean, you've got to get 60 votes in the House if you're going to do anything. And they don't have 60 votes for those structural changes that you're talking about because there's such a split inside their own tent between those super progressives, between those go along and get along Democrats, maybe the old Madigan Democrats, if you want to call them that, and then this mod squad that is trying to project themselves as the ones that want to do cuts first instead of tax increases first, and that's just making it incredibly difficult for them to find consensus to do anything, which is why they end up using duct tape and baling wire to put together a budget at the very last second, because they are scampering and desperately trying to get scraping by to get to 60. It's another difficult opportunity. It took them till 4:30 in the morning last year. It may take them till 5:30 in the morning this year.
Well, but I think that's the lack of backbone that I'm talking about. If you truly believe something, then, stand up for it.
But would you call it lack of backbone for Republicans if it were the super far right progressive or the super far right conservative Freedom Caucus crowd and the centrist Republican crowd that put votes on a Capitol bill that they don't have backbone because they can't come together? It's just ideological differences inside their own caucus.
And I think there's a little bit of both, but I do hear your point.
Well, I think that, when Madigan was in there, he, rolled with an iron fist. This is what we're doing. You're going to get in line. Welch, it's very much in disarray. There's all these different factions that just can't get on the same page. And then here we're in this situation where, in 2020, the budget was $40 billion. And now in 2026, they're talking about or projecting a budget of $55 billion.
Did you say 20 or 40? I think you meant 40, right?
40. Did I say 30?
It was 39 in FY19.
39 and then 40 in 2020, maybe. That's what I was reading here, but that may not be accurate. But
39 in FY19, 55.2 projected for FY26.
You're making a solid point. I just want to be sure that we were giving accurate info.
No, I mean, that's basically a 38% increase on the budget. We're paying the highest overall tax burden in the nation, 38% increase over the course of the last 6 years. And they're scraping by and trying to figure out new, revenue enhancers because they don't want to call them tax increases.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something, Patrick, being down there. From your, obviously off the record confidential conversations with lawmakers, where do they fall on the chart of like Michael to Chris? Meaning, if Michael was down there, he would be frustrated, bouncing off the walls because he's a do-gooder who's like, hey, I was elected to serve. Why am I not in the room helping make these difficult decisions? Chris, the government employee, would be like, I'm getting a paycheck, I'm getting a pension. Y'all don't want me to be in the room? I'm fine with that. Like, where do lawmakers fall on that? Are they happy they don't have to be in the room, or are they pissed off that they're as clueless as we are as to what's going on?
That's a tough question to answer. I mean, I think certainly Republicans want to be at the table and want to have a role in the solution, but then you've got if you've got Noreen Hammond and Chapin Rose at the table, they're just banging their heads against the the table itself, trying to get some cuts in a world where there are no cuts. The rank and file on either side, Republicans and Democrats, I think that they've sort of come to grips with the fact that the discussions happen above their pay grade, right? They have leaders, they have budgeteers that are in the room to hammer out a state budget. And when you go back to the caucuses, like House Democrats keep doing, and saying, all right, what do you like? What's your wish list? Then it just continues to complicate matters. So I see what you're saying, but I think it's, if you tried to do committee of the whole budget negotiations, we wouldn't be done May 31st. We'd be done like December 31st.
Yeah, I just was curious how the individuals felt. Like it's clear if you're not one of the handful of people in the room, you're just out. You're not part of it at all. I mean, I think as we were talking before we got on the air, it seems like it's even more this time than ever. Fewer people in the loop. Later that this budget's being released. I mean, again, we're on Thursday afternoon. We don't have details. And you were saying before we went on air that it looks like they're moving shell bills, so we might not know even today at all. So like it just seems like it's every year it gets even more closed loop, even more secretive. And I can imagine I'd probably fall a little more in line with Michael. Like if I was down there, I'd be like, I'm here. Let me, I should be part of this. Let me help. I was elected. My people should have a voice in this. But I don't know. I could see Chris just putting his feet up, being like, collected a paycheck. I'm good.
I got $166 per diem per day. Cash it in, baby.
Right. That's right.
Well, and how much of this is kind of by design, where it's like, let's release this at the very last minute because there's less people that have an opportunity to view this budget. There's less calls to our office from constituents, less emails because, hey, we provided it to them on a Friday night at, 10 o'clock. We vote on it, in the wee hours of Saturday morning. Nobody's going to know.
I don't know that that's
be able
true.
to complain.
I don't know that that's true because the way that they've done this the last couple of years is put a budget out like by today, right? In terms of the calendar, and one chamber votes on it and moves it over. The Senate has done that the last couple of years. So I think it's legitimately they just don't have a deal right now.
Yeah.
So let me can I pose a question? Because I genuinely don't know the answer to this question because I'm a political person. I don't work in Springfield. What happens if we don't have a budget on Saturday?
That's Bruce Runner.
Well, yeah.
Bills don't get paid.
Well, the bottom line is it gets harder, right? Because May 31st is the deadline to pass anything with an effective immediate date with the minimum majority vote. So that's 60 votes in the House, 30 votes in the Senate. So it becomes super majority. It becomes 3/5 when you have to do that after May 31st with an effective or July 1 effective date, which would be the new fiscal year. So that means you need 71 in the House, and I think it's 39 in the Senate. Don't hold me to that. I can't do the math in my head right now, and it's my head's like spinning. But 71 in the House
36.
36. 71 in the House is the big number, right? Because you've got 78 Democrats and getting, with the mod squad that wants to
it just
start cutting.
As you said, it just becomes that much more difficult to get. If they can't get a deal at 60, they can't get it at 71.
And then if you get to July 1st without a budget, then you start to run into Rauner era shit show, right? So you don't, and you really don't want to get there.
But some of this, I mean, listen, I agree with you, Patrick, that the stew's not done being stewed. So I certainly get your point, but I don't think that it's not an inaccurate point that they released this budget so late strategically as well. And I think two things can be true at the same time. And yes, they don't have a deal. Totally get that. But this is also a little bit by design that you have the weekend. And if you want to get Democrats in your caucus who are nervous about voting for revenue enhancements or spending cuts, you give them the cover of darkness. You give them the cover of a weekend to be like, look, it's, you don't have TV crews here right in your face. You don't have constituents calling you. I mean, those two things can also be true at the same time.
Well, it doesn't have to be this way, right? I mean, it's not this way in other states. I use Indiana as an example. One chamber passes the budget at the midway point of the legislative session. They flip everything between the two chambers at the midway point, and then the other chamber handles it the second half of the session. Then you get conference committees and things like that at the end. They use their revenue projections, they use their experts, and they have a budget hammered out by the middle of like February, right? And I get it. It's apples to oranges. It's a little bit different. I mean, it's obviously a smaller state, fewer challenges, but there's no reason that we're going into the brink every single flipping year like this. It's irresponsible, it's ridiculous, and it's a slap in the face to voters who deserve more transparency.
One last thing on the topic. This is the kind of thing we'd talk about if we were just sitting around in a cigar shop smoking cigars, catching up. But I've never had a chance the last few weeks to bring this up on a podcast. So with you three, I feel like we would actually bring this up if we were hanging out. So I want to bring it up here. So Ryan Spain did a press conference pushing against the new service taxes and encourage people to go to stopilservicetax.com to do that. And then Illinois Policy put out a story about the sales tax being bad, and they also push people to go to that website. The website's operated by AFP. It's an interesting development. It's all I have really on that, is that it's really interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that before, where IPI puts out pushing people to an AFP website, where Ryan Spain, one of the top leaders down in Springfield on the Republican side, actively encourages people to go to an AFP website. I don't know. I don't know if you guys saw that, if you guys think that's interesting or not. It certainly speaks to a level of collaboration amongst right of center entities that we maybe haven't seen in the past. I just found it interesting, and no one else has talked about it. So I figure throw it to you, political animals, and see what you think.
Well, I just feel like I hope it's a sign of what's to come, that there's going to be more coordination from these groups that have, shared goals, because in the past, it's kind of been everybody just goes their own way.
It was my understanding that the second Trump administration would end the Koch brothers' dominance of Republican Party politics. Once again, regretting my vote for Donald Trump. Why are the Koch brothers still around, I ask you? What are we doing here, folks? No, but seriously, I do agree with Michael. I mean, it's a good thing that, despite any opinions I might have on such things, if your Republicans, center-right coalitions working together is a good thing. Having unified message is a good thing, because one of the problems we often run into is that this group is focusing on this thing, this group is focusing on that thing. There's no coordination. There's no helping each other out. So if there's any benefit to all working together, it's that you're pushing a cohesive message.
To be honest, my first thought was ethical. Is it ethical to use state government resources like Ryan Spain?
I also had that concern myself.
To point people to AFP, which, while I'm sure AFP has a 501c3 instead of the political arm, right? It's still a very thinly veiled political operation. So, I
think this is operated under the C4, I would believe, but
they have like an educational arm, and then they have like a political arm. So that's probably how they're getting away with it.
Sure, but this appears to be organizing. So it wouldn't surprise me if somebody puts an ethical question around this, or complaint into the State Board of Elections or Executive Ethics Commission or something like that on this.
I mean, we do see, AFP is way more active today than they've been in years, obviously hiring up a lot of people. One of our former team members is over there and doing a lot of good work. So, it's certainly, and they've been doing ad buys, and they've been a lot more active even this year than they were last year, and they were active last year. So certainly bears, if you're political right of center, bears keeping an eye on. Definitely we're seeing AFP increase their activity here, which is, as Chris said, as Michael said, the more the merrier. All right, let's go over to transit. The one thing that has happened, though apparently not very well, is moving forward the transit reforms. There's a House version and a Senate version, which is they spent all this time negotiating, and then we get two bills. I don't know what the hell is going on, but it's Springfield. And there are some structural changes, and I want to talk about those. While the House version does not have funding, the Senate version does, and Governor Pritzker at least his staff has spoken about that. So we got to talk about the funding of it. And then just the reaction from people. I'll start with the structure of it. There are significant reforms to how the RTA under a new name would operate, and it's being empowered to direct transit in northern Illinois. So, there definitely are some significant changes. But here, we're not here to talk news. We're here to talk analysis. And here's the problem that many have with it, is that the changes that have been made to reduce the suburbs voice in this process. So right now on the RTA, these collar counties have 5 of the 15 seats. Under the House and Senate version, the collar counties would have 5 out of 20. They're adding 5 more seats, which dilutes the collar counties' voice. I will say, to be fair, the Senate version does have some language in there that makes the vote threshold a little bit higher than the House version does. But the House version is just 60% of the vote. So the collars no longer have a third voice, they have a quarter, and you only need 60% to get anything done. So that significantly reduces the voice of those collar counties. And if you look, and I've spent way too much time on this yesterday and today, but if you look at the various bylaws, there are certain things that require, 60% of the vote and at least two and at least one collar county representative. And a lot of that, so far as I've seen, is not in the new language. So there's a number of changes here that do reduce the collar county's voice or influence. Again, the Senate version is slightly better, I'll be fair. But ultimately, there's a reason why people were concerned about this, that, with these reforms, Chicago and Cook County, but especially Chicago, would gain much more of a voice of this regional transportation system. And it seems like under the changes, again, some good reforms, but we're not here to talk, we're not news, we're talking analysis. And this really does set up a lot of frustration throughout the collar counties and the suburbs over what's happening here.
It's really interesting to see how quickly it has been so widely panned, not only by Deb Conroy, who's a former House Democratic member, who's now the DuPage County Board Chair, and unions are against it. The revenue ideas, the sales tax increase is part of that, which is an indication that the governor opposes it. Theoretically, at least, I wonder if these were test balloons to see if one idea or another, like one just structural and one with structure and finance, could cobble together some public support. I'm having a really hard time seeing where they get to 60, 30, and 1 on these, especially because you're probably losing DuPage County votes heavily. If either one of these goes up for a vote, if they put it up on the board now, it's certainly there's a competition here between the city and the suburbs, right? Because the people in the suburbs are generally pretty happy with Metro. It works pretty well. It's pretty reliable. Frequency could be a little better. It's affordable, saves you from driving. I live 15 miles from the loop and it takes me more than an hour to get in, right? It saves you time. CTA is a complete wreck. Trains are unreliable. They smell of urine and weed. They're unsafe in places. People avoid CTA as much as humanly possible. So you have these two competing interests where one group is like, hey, things are going pretty well on our side. And the other group is like, oh my God, this is a mess. Please help us figure this out. It's really hard to mesh. It would be like trying to bring the Cubs and the White Sox together, because the Cubs are run relatively well, not perfectly, but relatively well, and the White Sox are a shit show. So how do you merge those two entities? And that's a really difficult proposition.
Yeah. Fair. I mean, I think, again, politically, as we look at this, as you just mentioned, Deb Conroy, the DuPage County board chair, is that her official title? President? Mm-hmm. Either way, came out strong, like really strong.
She came out swinging.
And we'll talk about why in a second. But I mean, I got to imagine the other collars as well. I mean, this does significantly impact the collar counties, and we're not even talking the revenues yet. Just the governance structure is a big hit to the collar counties. And we've seen over the years the influence that local mayors, that county officials can have on state lawmakers. And I don't know how any suburban, just like how we're talking about the Bears coming to Arlington Heights, how does any Chicago lawmaker vote for that? I don't know how any suburban lawmaker votes for this governance structure change that in many ways significantly dilutes the collar county's influence over the no longer RTA, what is it, NITA?
Well, it's giving more influence to the segment that doesn't have its act together. It's like the suburbs kind of have it figured out. The Chicago, area shit show. It's like, well, let's give more power to Chicago and then let the suburbanites just kind of deal with it.
And this is not a hard thing to spin. Like,
backwards.
Michael and Chris, you guys don't do messaging, but even you could easily put this in a TV ad or a mail piece. This is not a hard vote to spin against a Democrat who puts a vote on this bill, who's running in the suburbs or even downstate.
Well, in line with what we were talking about earlier in regards to like how much the suburban legislators are going to be opposed to this. The interesting thing has been, like, for the last 5 years, is there's been a shift of power within the Democratic Party, and from that within Springfield, from the city of Chicago to the suburbs, because the Democrats are able to pick up so many of these suburban districts, particularly in DuPage County, and that's where a lot of the legislative authority is flowing right now. When you had Madigan, Madigan was a Chicago guy. His district was Chicago. He supported Chicago legislation. Welch, he's not really a Chicago guy, but that wouldn't be surprised if his interest might align more with the Chicago side on this one. So the fact of the matter is that there's an increasing amount of influence within the Democratic Party and in Springfield, in the suburbs, and I think that's going to be a problem for this bill, and it's going to be an advantage to any suburban legislative challenger if their opponent actually votes for this bill in the suburbs. Like, it's going to be an advantage for you, because one thing we know about the suburbs and their transit is that if you like your transit, you really like your transit. I took the Metro to school every day, and I thought it was fine. Even back before COVID, the Red Line and the Orange Line were perfectly fine pieces of transportation. Not perfect, but it's gotten so bad with the CTA now, where you have to wait 17 minutes for the Orange Line to pick you up in Pulaski. Things are that bad, and even suburbanites know that. So I think that this is something to pay attention from a political perspective as well.
I want to make clear, I'm specifically using the word suburbs, even though Collar County is their influence in the NITA, currently the RTA, is being diluted. I dug deep into these bills, again, spent way too time on it. It's why, to you three, sorry the agenda was so late today, but I really dug into this because it's not, Cook County actually does get a little bit screwed here, not in the RTA / what's now going to be called NITA if this passes, but in the this also changes the boards for Metro, for CTA, for PACE, and while Cook County gains a little bit of a voice in CTA, they're actually losing a bit of their voice in Metro and in PACE. Cook County goes from 5 seats to 3 on the Metro board. On PACE, Cook County drops from 6 seats to 3. So it isn't just the Collars get screwed at the higher level in the new NITA, but Cook County gets screwed on the Metro and PACE boards, and so it's all the suburbs, suburban Cook County out to the Collars, that it's in some degree on one of these boards or multiple that end up getting screwed here. The only winners, there are 2 winners out of this. If either of these bills pass, only 2 people, other than the CTA getting bailed out, 2 people actually win out of this. The governor's a big winner. So currently he has no seats that he appoints on the RTA. In the new NITA, he'd appoint a quarter of the seats, 5 of the seats. He would also gain appointments on the Metro and PACE boards that he doesn't currently have. So the governor gains a significant amount of power if this passes. And Cook County Board President, which is currently Preckwinkle. Right now, people don't realize she only appoints 1 of the 5 Cook County representatives on the RTA. The other 4 are appointed by the commissioners that cover certain regions. Under this new structure, the Cook County Board President would appoint all 5. And on Metro, the Cook County gains. Cook County stays the same on Metro, and I think they stay the same on PACE, but Chicago gains. So Chicago is gaining some representation on the suburban boards, but Cook County loses representation on Metro and PACE. But Preckwinkle comes out okay, and Pritzker comes out okay. I think that's kind of interesting.
I would also argue Brandon Johnson gets to save face a little bit, because he's the face of the CTA chaos right now, and he gets to pass that buck to someone else, and also gets to find funding for mass transit that doesn't cost the city anything. So it could potentially be a win for him.
Yeah, I mean, there's people who are like, oh, word isn't out yet on how Brandon Johnson's going to react. Well, if Brandon Johnson has any amount of political brains, which Chris would argue he doesn't, but if he did, he'd be like, cool, not my problem anymore. But
good luck, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously Don DeWitt and Seth Lewis have come out pretty strong against this. Well, Lewis was strong. DeWitt wasn't as strong against it, but we'll see how this all plays out in terms of the negotiations. The funding is a big deal here. So we've talked just the structure. Let's talk about the funding. As we said, the House bill doesn't have funding attached to it, but the Senate bill does. And some of the funding that they're looking here that's in the bill, the sales tax, I don't believe is in there. They're talking about a transportation delivery fee. So your Ubers, your DoorDashes, your Lyfts, all those would have a surcharge, another surcharge added on top. They're talking about adding more tolls They're talking about taking away some of the current RTA sales tax that the counties utilize for their funding of infrastructure. Talking about taking that away, which is part of what set Deb Conway off. They're talking about including a real estate transfer tax on all the Collier counties and suburban Cook County, which that isn't talked about enough. That's going to be huge and a big problem for anyone who's trying to buy or sell a home. There's some pretty politically difficult tax and fee hikes in here, and we're not even talking about the potential of a sales tax expansion. So there's some tough revenue enhancements that they've got in this bill that I'm not sure how they could get to the number of votes they need for this. I mean, go try to convince Patrick. You're muted. Go try to convince, people who are driving. Hey, because you're not taking Metro, because you're not going on public transit, you're going to pay more in tolls. Like, go try to have that conversation with the suburbs.
Well, and they're running into a fight with Local 150 as a part of a tollway tax. The real estate transfer tax, when real estate prices are already through the flipping roof in the suburbs, and they've already got an exodus of people from the city. It doesn't make a ton of sense there. And a rideshare tax, when they've already taxed and taxed and taxed anyone who uses Uber, you just see the city and county taxes that are added to every single ride. They're going to be incredibly unpopular. And sure, there's fare increases and things like that go along with it that there should be, because people who use the system should have to at least have a little stake in it. But the political reality is these are going to be really hard to pass. And I think these were trial balloons, and they're going to come back in either the summer or November to really knock this out.
These are arguably harder to pass than any of the revenue things they're trying to do with the budget, because these are like directly affecting like one person's commute, their transportation, all the things. Like, that's why I was saying, part of the reason why I was saying earlier, like, if you're going to do all these stuff with the budget, all these revenue increases, you do it now. But like because it's a lot easier to do that than it is like, hey, your commute that you're paying 50 cents every time you go through another toll, which sucks for me because you know how many tolls are between my house and the office? It's a lot. And Colin doesn't reimburse tolls, but so we're not going to talk about that right now. But in any case, like that, this is the problem. So I think they're going to have a hard time passing this.
I mentioned earlier that real estate transfer tax, it's not insignificant. I mean, if I were to sell my home right now, which, as we've talked about many times in this podcast, our home values have not risen in Chicagoland like they've risen in the rest of the country. So here's yet another thing that's going to penalize you and keep your home value from going up. If I just sold my home now, this is a $1,200 tax that they're talking about adding on. And it would be paid partially by the seller, partially by the buyer. But this goes into depressing that home value increase for people, and most of these working families, that's their nest egg, is their home value, between property taxes and everything else in Illinois. Here's another thing that's going to further depress our home values. And we talked about Deb Conroy and her reaction. I'm just reading through this, and man, it is. I think you said blistering, or someone said blistering. I mean, just talking about how much this would cost DuPage County. I think they talked about 72 million. Am I reading that right, that this would cost them?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to breeze through. Here we go. It would take an estimated 25.8 million out of DuPage County and give it to the transit agencies. I mean, these are huge numbers that we're talking about, and Deb Conroy's the first. You've got to imagine, that the county leaders of some of these other counties will come out as well. Obviously, Will County, they tend to try to make Pritzker happy and the Democrats happy, so maybe not. Lake County, same deal, but some of these other counties, I'm sure, will be coming out just as loud. All right, anything else on transit, guys? Seems like we've talked this through pretty well. Michael, you think voters down in your region are going to be okay with Katie Stewart, or anybody else putting a vote on this that just gives more money to Chicago?
Yeah, I was on a transit that will never ride, and we're going to bail them out. It's absurd.
All right, let's move to the next one here. Let's talk pensions. So I've clearly worded this topic the way that I wanted to word it, but that's the power of being the host of the podcast. But this just clicked with me this week. It was last week, maybe the week before, that Pritzker was touting that we had record state hiring in the state of Illinois, and how much that was a big deal and how good that was. And we could have that debate, another time. But they're talking about how great, hiring was at the state of Illinois and how we're hitting record numbers. And then here I've got the public employee unions coming out and saying that the tier 2 benefits are keeping them from being able to hire. They're too low. We can't hire people enough. And I know there's a segment of this to talk about with teachers, and teacher retention and teacher recruitment is a big deal. But it rings hollow to me that 1 week later, after talking about how we have a record number of state employees and hiring has never been better, now here we're talking about how tier 2 pensions are, such an impediment to hiring that we've got to add 30 billion more to our liabilities over the next 20 years. I don't know, that just I struggle with that very basic concept.
Well, the 30 billion idea has essentially been off the table for months, right? I mean, as I've understood the negotiations so far on this, there are different union voices at the table, right? There's certainly the more extreme, we want a lot out of this, that you can probably point more toward the teacher side. And then there's a pretty responsible arm of labor that's trying to handle this safe harbor thing without blowing a giant hole in the unfunded pension liability. The reality here is that constitutionally, they have to fix the safe harbor.
Yeah, but just to be clear, since I don't want it to be too much on news here, in Pritzker's budget, that was 78 million a year. We talked about that last week with Batnick, that it's not that much that they have to add. They're taking what they need and they're going for, we want this, we want this, we want this.
And they're not going to get all that. I mean,
they're not taking the 30 billion, but they're certainly not just getting 78 million. There's plenty of I'm looking at this right now, improving to them the final average salary calculation, lowering the retirement age, improving the CLA, cost of living adjustment. Like there's Christmas tree items in here for sure.
But not to the extent that it's like the sky is the limit, I think is what Patrick's trying to say. Like they're clearly reaching some type of middle ground here. And listen, even as the resident guy who says, like, we probably shouldn't need to fix all these tier 2 pension systems. This isn't sustainable. We need to fix this at some point. Even saying that, it's pretty clear that they're moving like in a different direction where I think you think they're moving, Colin. It's like they're coming down with this. They're not coming really up. They're not. Yeah, I don't think they're going to be closer to 30.
You guys understand
this than they are. You guys
understand the concept of anchoring in negotiations. They anchor it way up here, and then they get to go say, "Look, we came down from our ask." My point is, I'm anchoring it down here. You only need
30 billion was never an anchor. It was never a starting point. Everyone looked at that and rolled their eyes.
Okay, but Chris's point is they're coming down from that number, and I'm saying that number was never real, to your point. Not going to happen, wasn't needed. So I'm not giving them credit for coming down from a fake number.
What are you going to give them credit for coming down from the real number?
I mean, if we actually see what the real number is, but we've been asking for that for I don't know how long. How many times have we been asking for the actuaries, for the numbers? Tell us what this will actually cost to fix it. Because even Republicans are saying, fine, let's deal with safe harbor. But nobody knows what that is. No one knows what that would cost. We have no actual numbers.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that this whole negotiating process has been less than ideal, and if not bad, like this has been bad. And it doesn't seem like it's getting any better down there. I think that if you were doing this negotiation in any other session where you weren't having the amount of problems they're already having, it would have been a little bit more transparent, or at least a little bit more. Like you would have understood a little bit more about what's going on right now with tier 2 pensions. I don't know what's going on. It doesn't seem like anybody's going on like you knows what's going on, Colin. But I just want to see the final number like you want to see.
Either way, I think we can. I mean, again, my central point is, if we're going to tout that we've had record hiring, then you can't come to me and say tier 2 pensions are horrible and this is a problem, we need to fix it. I'm sorry. If you look at even the tier 2 pensions, they're getting way more than anybody else gets in the private sector, even at tier 2. So come to me and say, we can't hire.
That's not true, because you're not meeting the Social Security standards.
For just the highest wage earners. This is what they have. Their messaging has been really, really good on this, but it's only the highest wage earners that aren't meeting that Social Security requirement. That's it. Like Batnick did a whole explanation on this last week. Like it's not that everyone would get screwed by this, but they haven't let the research come out, because the reality is it's just the highest of the wage earners that are not meeting the safe harbor.
Let's see that in court. I mean, I think it's a constitutional issue, right? If you don't want to go there, I understand your point, but I think you're also seeing that there's a a real belief that it has to be addressed by everyone, including Republicans. So my hope is that they do address it, but address it as minimally as humanly possible, so that they meet the safe harbor without blowing this gigantic gaping hole in what's already a pretty bad unfunded pension liability.
And that is my point. Address safe harbor. We don't need to add even more sweeteners to the pension system. We are finally going to start getting to a point. And we've been complaining for decades that because of pensions, we can't invest in mental health services. We can't invest in disability services. We can't invest more in education or whatever else because of pensions. We're finally, in the coming decades, going to get to a point where we don't have to say that anymore, that we could invest in more than just our pension liability. And then people are like, well, hey, look, let's use that money to put more in pensions. It's like, no, let's actually finally get to a point in the state where we can invest in other people who do need those services in the state. I'll end my point on this, which is a really good point in a letter that was written by a group including the Commercial Club, BGA, Civic Federation, the Chicagoland Chamber, and the Illinois Chamber. This line really stuck with me, and I think it's something people need to keep in mind, that any pension legislation that is passed is permanent because benefits cannot be reduced ever moving forward. That's what we're running into right now with our pension system. And so this rush, before we even know what we owe, before we even know what we have to do to fix the problem, this rush to add more to pensions, keep in mind the moment it's voted through, it is permanent. You cannot reduce it. And so we just need to keep that in mind. Let's do it right, because this isn't something Springfield lately has done this thing where, well, we pass it, but we'll do trailer bills. It'll be fine. This is not one of those bills you can do that on. You got to actually get it right the first time, which isn't Springfield's forte. All right, let's move on. Chris, I figured you'd want to talk about this, and it was in your list. I know you're a huge fan of assisted suicide. It aligns really well with your Catholic beliefs. So I'm sure you were very excited to see that the assisted suicide bill has been resurrected. Another bill was cleaned out. They tossed this in, so it's now SB 1950, or like Amendment 2 or whatever it is to SB 1950. But either way, I know you're really pumped about this, that we're talking about medical aid and dying again, right?
No, extremely, Colin. And it's interesting because the focus around assisted suicide legislation was up until this point SB 9, which had already passed out of committee, and I believe had 2 readings already in the Senate. That's where a lot of the focus was for assisted suicide, and now we're moving back to the House. And it seems like there's not a lot of enthusiasm to get this bill passed in the House, at least right now, which is interesting because my pessimistic mentality up until this point was always the Democrats had nothing to lose by passing assisted suicide in the state, because because the moral, the social debate in politics in the state are so heavily in favor of Democrats that there really wasn't much they could lose by passing it. But the fact that it took until literally Thursday before the session's over with to even readjust the way they're moving this bill around, that's telling to me that there is some type of holdup here to why this bill isn't getting through. They're kind of moving fast, like you said, with HB 1950, which was not the original House bill on this. The original House bill on this was
just to clarify. And I may have said it wrong. It's SB, just to be clear. Senate bill.
It's SB. It was SB 1950. The original Senate bill on this was SB 9, and the original House bill on this was HB 1328. That's what the Compassion and Choices group, because it's always choice, guys. That's the word that polls the best. It's always choice. It's that group, but there are serious concerns here, because for a lot of even progressive Democrats, there is a concern that the insurance industry and the insurance lobby is going to put more money into paying for assisted suicide than perhaps they would for paying for your cancer treatment or something like that. And that's how things go in Canada, where assisted suicide, I believe, is like the #1 cause of death in Canada now, because the government healthcare industry won't pay for you to get therapy. They won't pay for your cancer treatment, but they will pay you to end your own life. And that's the slippery slope of medical aid and dying, or assisted suicide, as many prefer to call it. So it's something to look out for. I really, from a political perspective, I'm still pressed to find what the major political liability would be for Democrats. I would certainly run wild with this. I think there is a political liability. I think you can tie any Democrat who votes for this bill to the big insurance lobby, to big pharma, who want this type of legislation so they don't have to keep people healthy. They want to make people die because it's cheaper. I think there's a better messaging around that. But I don't know if the Republican Party or conservatives are ready for that. But I am at least encouraged that this is a last-minute thing and not something that was pushed through really easily. And I hope this legislation is not.
Look, I don't like it. I don't like the idea. I don't like the morals of it, but my morals aren't anyone else's morals. What matters to me doesn't matter to a lot of people out there, and that's fine. People are allowed to believe what they believe. Watched my mother die of cancer in front of me, and it was incredibly painful. And I can understand if she would have made that decision. I wouldn't have liked it, but I have compassion in that regard. What I do is listen to experts, and there's one doctor in the General Assembly, Bill Howder from the Peoria area, uh, who has told me that there are serious ethical concerns for doctors regarding this idea, because of course their number one rule is do no harm, and it runs into insurance issues, it runs into malpractice issues, it runs into liability issues, and of course just violating their oath. So it's a bigger question than just does someone have the right to do this? That's not for me to judge, but I think there are some serious liability and ethical issues on the medical side. And again, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the topic, but I have a hard time believing that this moves before Saturday because it just seems like an issue that it is way too controversial inside of both caucuses to be able to cobble together the number of votes it would take to pass.
Well, and Patrick, I think what fascinates me just from a political perspective, because I'll ignore the issue itself because I'm not a policy expert, but just from the political side of it, like the strata of this, like the layers just fascinate me because this isn't so many of our issues. It's like, well, conservatives will be against it, liberals will be for it. We'll see what the moderates do, but this is not that kind of an issue. I would be fascinated to look at polling on this issue. I wish, if it does become an issue, I'd love to be an actual issue. Let's debate it. Let's hear from different people because you've got, whether it's for religious reasons or medical reasons or personal reasons, financial reasons, there's just so many aspects to this that don't break along your traditional party lines. And sometimes our politics can get quite boring. Red versus blue, left versus right. Occasionally it's nice to have an issue like this that just doesn't break on party lines. And for that reason alone, I'm certainly interested in it. But it's from a political perspective. I mean, Chris is right. This is not a tough issue to be able to spin, if somebody were to vote for it. But I agree with both you two, Chris and Patrick, that it doesn't seem like this would pass. However, isn't it every session there's like one bill that everyone's like, where the hell did that come from? And it suddenly just passed overnight, and now we're talking about getting signed into law. I'm not saying that's this one, but at every session there's something that we're all like, wait, what? So I mean, it's not 0% that this thing happens.
By the way, theoretically, the most libertarian of Republican would be for this, right? So I mean,
Theoretically.
I don't know that any
Yeah,
actual sitting member of the Republican caucus in the General Assembly would be, but if
yeah,
you've got super libertarians, like that, this seems to be
yeah.
something that aligns with that freedom idea.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
listen, there's someone that's really special to me who has told me several times over the years that I'm being very careful because I don't want to share too much, but that they wish they could die, but they're strict Catholic, just like Chris is, and they can't. It has to happen. It's God's will. It has to happen naturally. And Chris, I don't want to butcher it. I don't want to speak for you, but even people who are strict Catholics, there are some who wish they could be for this, who say they religiously can't. I mean, it just from a political standpoint, it's an issue that gets really fascinating really quickly.
Well, personally, I'm opposed to this. I mean, as I'm sure you would assume. But if they're going to do something, they've got to have like some significant safeguards in here because I could see you running into like some serious problems. I mean, look at, like Chris said, I just looked it up and it said, California has assisted suicide, and Canada does as well. Canadians are 15, but it's 15 times more likely in Canada than it is in California. I mean, their numbers are through the roof. I'm sure a lot of that is because their healthcare system is totally government run. Um, but we'll see what they do in Springfield.
Lately, Illinois seems to really want to follow California's lead. So again, I wouldn't be shocked if I wake up on June 1st and read that somehow this thing snuck through because like California does it, seems like immediately Illinois wants to start doing it. I don't know when that started, but it's been a weird thing lately.
Just one final thing for the record, in line with what Patrick was saying. If any member of the Freedom Caucus or the House Republican Caucus in general votes for this bill, you're going to be a clown of the week for like until I'm not on this podcast anymore. Every bill you vote for, every like tweet you post, every Facebook post, you are going to be made a clown out of it. Because if you're like
Wait,
if we
listen,
can't
I'm
if
not
we
saying
can't be conservative on the most pressing of social issues,
but how is
then
this? But
we
how is
should all
this?
just be Democrats. Then,
Chris,
Colin, we should all just be
this isn't
Democrats.
conservative or liberal. I mean, it's there are limited government individuals. Patrick mentioned libertarian types who are like you should have control over your own body to do what you want with it. And so I think there is. I mean, there's not many Republicans like this anymore, but for a while was sort of that limited government libertarian bent to a number of Republicans. If that's your belief system, I could see you justifying a vote for this. I don't think it's that cut and dry.
One could argue it falls right in that anti-vaxxer thread of my body, my choice thing, right?
I'm sure it does, though. I would love to see how much money those people are taking from the pharmaceutical lobby at the same time.
We'll see. Plane going or a helicopter going overhead. So whatever Chris just said, I didn't hear it. So he could have gotten away with whatever he wanted to in that moment because I didn't hear it. All right, let's talk energy. We're almost done with Springfield bills here. We can get into some politics, but let's do the last one here and talk energy. We've talked energy a lot the last few weeks, so we don't necessarily have to get into it a ton. But here was something I found really interesting. Bill Cunningham, who's one of the leading people on energy, he's in the Senate, had a quote that I thought was just really telling because what you hear all the time as Cub has come out and said, it's downstate and northern Illinois, everyone's seeing a huge rate increase on June 1st, and it's all because of, let me make sure I get this right. I want to use their wording that they've been using here, that they're saying to pay for electricity, it's because of PGM and MISO, because of an increase in their capacity prices. They're trying to use this really this language that no one who doesn't follow energy will follow. And even those who follow energy have admitted to me this stuff is super, super, super complicated. But that's the language they're trying to use. And Bill Cunningham actually came out and admitted what that actually means, which he said the only way to deal with this, there's only two ways of doing that. It's either by decreasing demand for electricity or increasing supply. Admitting the fact that the reason, even though they want to use all those language and blame PGM and blame MISO, everything you read, the reason why we have that spike, the reason why there's an increase in capacity pricing is because of a reduction in supply and an increase in demand. And what are the two things in Illinois that the Democrats have been doing on energy? Reducing our supply. And then when it comes to quantum computing and everything Pritzker's trying to put forward, increasing our demand. The reason for these increased energy rates that working families are going to see starting on June 1st is directly because of those Democratic policies that reduce supply and increase demand.
You want to know what put us in this spot? CEJA put us in this spot because it required the transition from coal-fired power or natural gas-fired power to wind and solar in a market that is not ready to take over the power generation and the capacity needed for a state this size. So now we're paying more for the energy that we use, and we still have to buy that coal and natural gas fired power that's being produced in Indiana and Kentucky and Missouri instead of Illinois, all at the same time while we're not expanding nuclear power, which is the cleanest, safest opportunity to produce power in this state out there. I am all for wind and solar, all for wind and solar. I think it's been a great addition to rural areas downstate, which has increased property tax bases, which has helped farmers make a living, even in down years or when Donald Trump's trying to sell out farmers with his Chinese trade wars. So it's provided them extra security and generational wealth. The problem is the market just hasn't developed for them yet. They're not efficient enough. They don't produce enough. They don't work as well as they need to provide for our infrastructure. So instead of reforming the problem, they're trying to just raise prices on everybody else to push down demand on these data centers or the quantum sites that they're all patting themselves on their backs over, and it's just causing more harm than good in the end. When all we have to do is go back and say, listen, let's produce some cheap energy while we develop these renewable resources. because it's not going to be there tomorrow.
It's the or. It's the or word here. It's like, why did it have to be either or? Let's just shut all this down, force ourselves into this stuff. And a lot of us were saying, okay, we agree we want to increase renewables. Let's do that, but we still need energy as we're making the transition. But our politics is always or. It's like, no, either you have to be for one thing or for the other. You can't have a reasonable approach, a measured approach that thinks long term. I'm glad you added nuclear to that, Mike or Patrick, because I agree. CJ put us in this position, but so was this hatred of nuclear for decades, thanks to the far lefties and the green people. It's like these bad decisions for decades have put us in this point, and now you want to say it's PGM's fault, it's MISA's fault, it's all these other. It's not our decisions. It's not the bills that we put forward. It's not the changes we made. It's like, no, you did. I mean, I know Cunningham didn't actually fully admit that, but he was the one who came the closest to actually admitting the reality, which is when you reduce the supply and increase the demand, yeah, obviously the cost is going to go up. This is basic economics.
Well, I think, we've got to be, when it comes to energy, it's got to be all of the above. And the Democrats have tried to, push the, solar and wind too quickly. And it's like, you've got to do everything. Maybe there comes a point where solar and wind is producing enough, is reliable enough when they become more efficient with it, when we get more, on the grid, where we can reduce some of these other things and be more environmentally friendly, but they move way too fast. And now they're saying, by 2030, we'll probably be a net importer of energy, where we're getting more of our supply from other states, other sources, than we are from, Illinois itself. And that's just going to drive the prices up even higher when people can't afford it.
Well, Southern Illinois is already a net importer, but yeah, you're right. I mean, we could get to that point in the whole state in the next couple of years. The reason why this matters is there's SB 40. There's an energy omnibus that's being put forward. The only place I've found details for this are behind the paywall on CatFacts, and I want to respect that. So I don't want to get into too much unless, Patrick, you have it and you want to share it, that you've gotten it from a source. But I want to respect paywalls and be careful here. But there is an energy omnibus that's being pushed forward down in Springfield, and this matters because in a couple days, you're going to see all throughout the state of Illinois, $30, $40, $50 on average, a price hike on people's energy bills over the course of the summer. That's not insignificant. And Republicans have already shown signs, and hopefully we do even more, have already shown signs of being ready and willing to pounce on this and hold Democrats accountable for their actions, which led to this increased cost of living for working families.
I have not written about this, but it's on my agenda of the 65,000 things to do before Saturday.
All that free time you have? Another thing I want to add here, just TMA has been doing a lot of polling of their members, which has been super helpful. And they polled their members on this. They asked them, do you support, I think they worded it, rejuvenating Illinois' nuclear and coal plants? Or do you want to go fully dependent on renewable energy, or do an all of the above approach? 43%. Olive Lane bring it up on the screen and post. 43% said nuclear and coal, 18% said solar and wind, 39% said all of the above. So 82% of the respondents said yes, nuclear and coal should be some part of this solution. There's a couple bills down in Springfield to do that. HB 3604, SB 1527, to be able to build more nuclear power plants in this state. Obviously, we'll be watching those very closely here in the final days of session, but nuclear especially has to be part of the solution. Coal possibly as well. You're not going to get there with solar and wind. We're going to see that in our energy bills over the next few months, the end results of those actions. All right, let's get out of policy. Let's get into politics. By the way, we did allow Patrick, because he's super busy down in Springfield. Once we got into politics, he said he's welcome to jump off if you'd like. He's a political animal, so my guess is he's going to want to stick around. But in case, Patrick, you tell us you have to go, I want to warn our viewers and listeners that we might suddenly stop seeing or hearing from you.
I'm here as long as I can be.
All right, I love it. Let's talk politics. So we're seeing, not just in Illinois, but around the country, what we've predicted, which is that a lot of incumbent Democrats are going to be facing challenges from their left. In Illinois, we're seeing some of the more, I don't know, not far left Democrats. I don't want to call them moderates because they're not really moderates, so I'm sure Patrick will call them moderates. But you've got Budzinski now getting a challenge from her left. You've got Schneider and IL-10 getting a challenge from his left. We've talked about a few other districts in the past few weeks where you see far left primary challengers. Obviously, Schakowsky had a primary challenger, though now she's getting out in her district. So we're seeing this a lot And you're seeing just stories about this nationally. Politico had a big story on this that Michael, I know you flagged. That this isn't unique just to Illinois, and that national Democrats are getting nervous that these messy Democratic primaries could hurt their chances at retaking the House. So, curious what you guys think. Whether it's just the overall idea here that these left of center challenges to a safe incumbent Democrats, or just the specifics in Illinois. I mean, I don't see Budzinski losing in a primary. I don't see Schneider losing in a primary, but it's significant that they're being challenged from the left.
So the
Is
thing
is
about
it is
no,
it
I mean, not
Schneider,
really.
Schneider hasn't really been challenged in a long time. Budzinski wasn't challenged. I mean, it is significant that they're pulling challengers here, just like it was significant that Schakowsky got a far left challenge.
Yeah, but Caston had a challenger in 2024, and we really didn't talk about that. That was kind of like a nothing burger. Listen, Democratic primaries happen all the time. They do, because you have an establishment in the party who maintains some type of grip on power, and then you have a further left, grassroots vanguard type group that wants to take power from the establishment. Like, that's how this works. It happens in the Republican Party too. But the thing is that it seems like a lot of these primary challenges seem to be over, like the Israel-Palestine divide. Not every one of them, of course, not every one of them, but a lot of them is over Israel-Palestine. And I guess you could say that's significant in some regard, but none of these are going to be successful. I don't anticipate Schneider losing. I don't anticipate Budzinski losing. If Caston draws another primary challenger, I don't know if he would, I don't think he would lose that. It would have to be a pretty good candidate. So no, I mean, is it significant that there's primaries on the Democratic Party? Yeah, but then you might want to look in the mirror and say, yeah, there's a lot of primaries on. We had Darren Bailey primary Mike Boston in 2024, and that was like the biggest news of the
But
2020.
that was significant, right? I mean, isn't that the point here? That too many people just assume the only infighting that exists is on the Republican side, but it's just not true. And we're seeing significant signs of that level of infighting on the Democratic side right now.
But who are these people that are primarying these people? Like, they don't. It's not. They don't. There aren't names that really stick out to you. None of these candidates have a glaring. They have a glaring like flaw within the Democratic Party that you would say, yeah, they could lose. I mean, listen, take it from me. I was on one of those primaries. I was the one helping the guy who was getting primary, but that was over abortion and a lot of other issues. Like, it's not like Brad Schneider's pro-life, and he's gonna like that's gonna be like a big part about that issue. It's not like Brad Schneider bucks the party on a significant issue like gun control or anything. Like, no, not really. It's not really that significant. Darren Bailey was a significant political like commodity to where when he primaried Mike Boss, it's like, wow, that's interesting. Darren Bailey, he was the nominee for governor. But who are these people primarying these Democratic incumbents?
I think the
Well, I
difference
think
you're seeing is that the primaries on the right are more generally broad-based conservative versus hashtag rhino, right? That it's this person just isn't conservative enough in all fashions, right? Like somehow Darren Bailey tried to make the case that Mike Bost was some sort of squishy liberal rhino. In these Democratic primaries, the ones that gain traction, Marie Newman against Lipinski was all about abortion. The Schakowsky primary, I can't say her name. How do you say her name?
Abagazala.
Abagazala. Her campaign was going to entirely be about Palestine, Gaza, Israel, right? That it was going to be entirely about that to fire up the progressive left and make it look like Schakowsky was old and out of touch and supporting a genocide. There are specific issues that they are getting traction on, which is different than the ideological issues that Republicans are having at this point. I didn't even know the name of Nikki Budzinski's primary challenger. I had to look it up while you were talking about it. That ought to tell you how seriously he should be taken at this point. So no, I think they are apples and oranges as we go into this cycle.
Well, I think one of the differences though between, like what we dealt with this last cycle on the Republican side, like Mike Bost versus Darren compared to these, is that, the Democrats on the national level are trying to figure out what is the best path forward for, their party. And you have individuals like David Hogg who says, he's going to raise all this money and invest it in these safe districts where there are primaries. So I think, some people are seeing that rhetoric and saying, hey, I don't think Nikki Budzinski's doing a good job. I'm going to jump in and primary her from the left maybe I'll get some support from David Hogg or one of these outside groups. We didn't really have that in the Republican primary in 2024, where there was this national, it wasn't a, response to a loss where it's like, well, we lost this election, like we need to primary these incumbents because we feel like they're not, speaking truth to power. That wasn't really what we were dealing with.
Mike, we last time we saw this on the Republican side was the Tea Party era. I mean, and I think that's what you're seeing in the Democratic side. The only thing I'll push back on, Michael, is I've looked at these announcements in these districts, and it's never about the incumbent. Like the guy running the 10th, the person running the 13th, even Kat in the 9th. It was never like, I'm running because I don't like what Schneider's doing. I'm running because I don't like what Baczynski's doing. I'm running because I don't like Trump. I don't think the National Democrats have their act together, and we need to do something different. So they're not running against the incumbents, and that's where, Michael, I think you are making a great point, which is what I'm trying to key on. That the environment right now is not great for Democrats in that they are searching for an answer, and as they're searching for an answer, you're seeing more and more people step up and say, we think the answer is we need a new generation of even further left people in Congress, even further left people running for office. And to me, that doesn't bode well for Democrats in 26, 28, 30. If they are successful, if that's the direction they take their party, that's significant. And so, yes, is Schneider going to lose? Baczynski going to lose in a primary? Heck no. I get that. I concede that. But I think the larger picture is what I'm looking at, which is I'm seeing a bigger fracture amongst Democrats than I've seen ever.
Well, and also a big part of it too, I think, is not necessarily like, yeah, Nikki's not going to lose, Schneider's not going to lose, right? They're going to win by, probably pretty significant margins. But the question is, how do they respond to these challengers? Because, sometimes you can have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, this guy's primarying me from the left. Maybe I need to move, in that direction to just kind of fend it off or, create less problems for myself down the road. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these incumbents respond to the challenges.
It's certainly going to, at minimum, drags the party even further left, which is something we've been talking about. So, all right, let's get into another topic here. This one, I'm going to be purposeful in using one name but not another. We've seen over the last few weeks, there are a couple troll candidates in Illinois whose entire platform and entire political strategy is based on trolling. We've talked about one of those, Abba Gazala in the 9th district. As Republicans attack her, she uses that to run for office. She uses that to post on social media. She got a Daily Herald article this last week. She talked about how she had to hire security because somebody made a threat against her, which it was not. I mean, it's a nothing burger, and even kudos to the writer of the story was kind of like, not really. This didn't really actually happen. But you see, the whole point here is Abba Gazala's strategy is to sort of like, look, they're coming after me, and it's this troll candidate strategy. And we see there's a candidate for Republicans on the governor's side who's doing a very similar thing, who is getting in all these fights with precinct people and grassroots people, all to get eyeballs, all to get attention, which is why I'm purposely not using their name. But I think it's interesting to talk about, which is this sort of strategy nowadays in 2025 in politics where eyeballs are king. And so the more you can be interesting, the more that you can create controversy, the more you get attention, the more you can raise money, and possibly the higher your odds of success of winning. It's clearly an active strategy among certain candidates. So I think it's worth talking about. The only thing I'd ask is, I'm sure you all know exactly who I'm talking about on the Republican side. Let's not let them win and use their name. But them, Kat Abba Gazala, again, their whole strategy here is create controversy so I can possibly, get attention and win. It's clearly part of the strategy now in the social media era of politics, and I wanted to know what you guys think about it.
I think to describe Kat as purely a troll candidate is disingenuous. Slightly disingenuous.
I didn't say purely a troll candidate. Don't put words in my mouth.
I think you did say something along those lines. If we went back in the tape, but if you didn't, then I apologize. But I think that kind of sells her short a little bit. This isn't to say that I think Kat's going to win this primary. I think she could, but I don't think she's the betting favorite by any means necessary. But I think hers is a little bit more strategic than, say, the other instance that you may be referring to. There is a tactic, especially on the fringe left in politics, to be a little bit bombastic on social media. Pick your fight with your local stupid Republican Twitter account, and you'll get clicks on that. And it does work. And Democrats, primary candidates, have shown that this is something that can work. And it I think it works better for Democrats, especially young Democrats like Kat, than it does perhaps in Republicans or even other Democrats. I think
I mean,
there's a specific
in
niche
that
of
same
candidates.
race, Chris, in that same race, Laura Fine took a Dan Proft tweeter post and she used that to get attention and try to raise some money. So it wasn't just Kat. I mean, Laura Fine did it. So the strategy is, I mean, as you're saying, it does work. It gets attention, it raises money, it gets eyeballs. And again, the whole point of this podcast is to talk about what works, what doesn't work, to try to equip our candidates and equip people out there. I mean, it's as much as I personally don't like it. I'm not sort of built this sort of Instagram style candidate. We've seen over the years some of those candidates do get attention. Some of those candidates do raise money. What's her face? The person whose name I always forget, who ran in the 14th district. She's now in Florida, thinking about running for Congress down there.
Catalina Lau.
Catalina Lau. She raised a bunch of money as sort of being that Instagram clickbait candidate. It works, and honestly, we have to have that conversation because if it works, we should probably be looking into it.
Well, because we've reached a new level of the content creator YouTube candidate, right? That the clickbait candidate. If you venture into the political podcast world outside of the smoke-filled room, of course, it's the clickbait headlines. The most egregious thing so and so has ever done, or this is going to end Donald Trump, or Democrats are doomed, right? This is the world that we're in, where it's over the top clickbait bullshit and there's no real policy discussion. Listen, I understand that there are things about I'm gonna whiff her name again, Abba Ghazala's candidacy that are serious. And if you don't think that the Israel-Gaza issue is serious among a part of Democratic voters, you're not paying attention. Mm-hmm. I don't know if what was the line that her campaign office was the local Hezbollah field office or something like that?
Yeah, the home of Hezbollah.
I thought that was kind of funny. I didn't think that was a threat. I mean, it was kind of a funny line because clearly the pro-Gaza crowd is, and certainly you can support Israel and also support Palestinian children not dying too. But I also don't think Hezbollah or Hamas are particularly good people, right? So there's a little bit of it's not as cut and dried as she's trying to make it, or the pro-Palestine crowd is trying to make it. Is that a threat? No. And that's why she used her clickbait video blogger resume to help her trump this stuff up, to not use that name the other way. The other dude, by the way,
honestly, hiring security, like, she made it newsworthy. She made a nothing burger into a news story, which is politically admirable.
The other dude, this guy who is completely, I'm not going to say his name, is completely irrelevant in Republican politics today. The amount of time he gets, he is in your head, the amount of headspace of Colin Corbett that he's taken inside that poof of your hair, pal. You spend way too much time on this dude. And let him troll and do his own thing because nobody gives a shit.
I think the point, I mean, take a look at the latest video and tell me that he's too much in my head with the retweets, the comments, and the thousands of views. I'm not freaking crazy here.
I've never seen a tweet. I've never seen a video. I don't know anything about it.
I think the larger point here, though, is twofold. One, when you've got a troll candidate on your side who thrives on attention, don't give them attention, which is why we're not using the name. That's the point. But what I want to ask you guys is, should we be using this to our advantage? Because if Laura Fine or Daniel Biss win in the 9th district, yeah, they're far left, but like, they're not going to make crazy headlines that we're going to raise money on. If Kat Abou-Ghazala wins that primary and becomes the congressperson for the 9th district, for Republicans, we can raise a crap ton of money off her. We're not going to beat her in the 9th district, but could that be advantageous to the Republican Party to have a Congresswoman Abou-Ghazala? Heck yes. And so if she is thriving off this attention and it's helping her win, should we not poke that bear all the way through March? I mean, we don't have money. We can't go in there and pull Pritzker and spend millions of dollars to help her get nominated. But if she's getting attention because of Republican activity and Republican attention, should we continue giving her attention then? Because I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong, the best outcome for Republicans politically would be her winning that primary.
I would say yes, but I also think you're underestimating like the left in general, that it's just good for clickbaiting. It's a little bit more serious than, oh my gosh, we could raise a lot of money off of this person. I think politics is a little bit more serious than that. But I don't think you're wrong, Colin. I mean, if you're only interested in making the Democratic Party look the way that you perhaps want it to, then yeah, you probably want.
Politics, baby. Come on. You keep saying you
But
want us to get off our butts, be more creative. Like, so I'm giving you an idea here that's creative, and you're like, well, I don't think it's what you were saying. Like,
well, I think this is one
should
of
we
those.
not be, if we're this far in the super minority, should we not be using guerrilla warfare style tactics like this? Come on.
Well, the
Oh, I
Democrats do it to
100%.
us. They make sure our social media warriors,
Yeah.
maintain their relevance.
Come
How
I'm
on.
about
just
you do
gonna
it in the
say,
districts you can win?
Yeah.
How about you go after Eric Sorensen, or you go after Lauren Underwood, or you go
We could
after,
do two things at once.
can
no,
you?
you can't.
I
This
don't
is
know
the
about
Illinois
that,
Republican
Colin.
Party. No, you can't. No, you can't.
Yeah. You guys are all failing me. I need a new political team to talk politics with. All right, I'll move on. All right, let's go to this last one here. This is a catch-all for political conversation, just whatever you guys want to talk about. There hasn't been a ton of political news in the last week, but Chris and Michael weren't here with us when we had the Jed Davis news about how he's looking at the 14th. Obviously, we've got a lot of people looking at the aisle 7, even though the incumbent is still there. Lots of people looking at the 2nd. We've got announcements about the 9th district race. So there's stuff going on. Pick a topic, pick a race. This is your chance to give it some eyeballs and talk about it.
Well, the one thing that I think is going to be interesting on the Democratic side is, who Pritzker picks as his lieutenant governor. It does not seem like there's really been a lot of, conversation about that. Obviously, with Juliana Stratton running for Senate instead, he's going to have to pick a new running mate. I assume we'll hear more, once we get through session. But, Andy
I think most
Manar was,
insiders just believe it's going to be Manar.
yeah.
Which I've heard, and if you're picking someone who could take over the job, then you probably go towards that route. But think politically, Pritzker will win no matter what. But two white dudes in this era of politics, I don't know how you get away with that.
I mean, you'd think if you're a Pritzker, you'd want to pick somebody, a female, a minority, because, in his head, he's thinking, oh, I'm going to be the next president of the United States. And can't you get some political capital by handing the baton over to, somebody that kind of fits that mold as opposed to handing it over to Andy Manar?
I mean, the dude's as white, if not whiter than me. I mean, you want to say I picked the whitest guy in Illinois? It's me or Andy Manar or Patrick Fingston. Like you're not checking boxes, which is an important part of Democratic politics, Chris, isn't it? Like Republicans don't focus on racial politics as much as we should. Democrats over focus on it, but that's the reality here. Is if you've got Pritzker not only picking his running mate, who's another white dude, but clearly picking the guy he wants to take over when he leaves. I don't know how that flies in today's Democratic politics.
It doesn't, frankly. And I would be very, very surprised if Pritzker actually goes through a pick. I would be very surprised. I don't think he can politically. I mean, listen. There's two things I can say here. The first thing is like I don't think he can politically afford to do something like that. From like if you just look at this purely through like the Democratic Party, if your billionaire Jewish governor picks the whitest person in Illinois to be his lieutenant governor, that doesn't really play that well. At the same time, I also think that Pritzker is arrogant enough politically to where he probably doesn't care what the rest of the Illinois Democratic Party is going to think about who he picks for lieutenant governor. Okay. In 2018, when he first picked Juliana Stratton, he had to pick somebody to save face from the fact that he is a rich white Jewish billionaire. Okay. He had to do that. That's why you picked Juliana Stratton. Now, does he need to do that? I don't think he thinks he needs to do that.
I mean, he'll win re-election either way, so he could do whatever the hell he wants. But
Here, if you poll people and you do this for a living, how many people, normal people, know the name of the lieutenant governor of Illinois? It's under 10%, under 20%.
Last time I remember polling on like Sanguinetti, nobody knew who she was. So
exactly, it is a nothing burger politically.
Well, I'm sorry, we see it now in the polls for Stratton. Like, there's a reason why they had to keep Underwood out, like because Stratton's name ID was so low.
So I don't think there's a political or policy. I mean, it's more of a policy angle because Manar can do the job. I think that's inarguable among Republicans and Democrats, is that Manar knows how to do the job if he were to be elevated. For whatever reason, I think there were a lot of concerns that Stratton couldn't do the job if she were to be I wrote about that. There were people concerned that it would be a Governor Juliana Stratton if Pritzker became Veep or something like that. I mean, what's going to happen? Pritzker's going to get a challenge from a progressive African American in the primary because he picked a white LG candidate. Give me a break.
Yeah.
It isn't necessarily that. It's more so from like an internal political strife angle, especially during the lieutenant, like when your current lieutenant governor is running for U.S. Senate, you probably want to keep as many people in the Democratic Party happy as possible when you have one of your chosen people running for U.S. Senate. That was basically my claim. Again, I sometimes view things purely through racial politics, especially through Democratic racial politics, where it literally would not make sense if Pritzker chose Andy Menard just from a logical perspective. Doesn't mean he won't.
But the reality is, when else is someone like that going to win? I mean, Andy Menard runs for governor statewide. He doesn't win because the reality is people who could make good governing leaders typically aren't good politicians. And we've seen that over and over. Even on the Republican side, we get people who run for office for governor. And you're like, wow, they'd make a good governor. I'll be honest. I mean, Richard Porter. I think from a policy perspective, he sounds like the kind of person who could be a good leader, but that's the kind of person that tends to struggle in a campaign because nowadays in politics, you need a different skill set to win a campaign than you do to actually govern. So from a governing perspective, if you could pass the baton on to somebody who just was going to focus on governing, that isn't the worst thing, but we're a political podcast. Come on, y'all.
If he doesn't pick Menard, I would say he probably gets a big look from like a Latino or Latina candidate. Karina Villa, who's a state senator from West Chicago. I think she's midterm. That's a name that a couple of people have kicked around to me as someone that would potentially be in the mix. But I think
I also heard that there was hopes that Underwood would run for Senate and then like Castro would run for Congress. So like you could also go that route. I don't know if she's up.
Castro's in 8, so Castro's going to run in 8.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay,
announce.
Yeah.
She's going to announce after session.
Yeah, that's what it
she
is.
essentially said that.
Yeah.
So I think the question would be what was there a deal with Underwood?
Yeah.
And I don't think that there was.
We'll see. Only other thing I wanted to talk about here, I know it's county politics, but Gene Kesmerick, the DuPage County clerk, if you've been reading any of the news over the last few years, whether Democrat or Republican, we can all agree that you got to know how to do the job. And Kesmerick has done an awful job as the DuPage County clerk. She's running for re-election. So my encouragement to our DuPage County audience is please, if there's no other seat that you run somebody for, there's a lot of focus right now on who succeeds Mendrick, and I get it, that's fine. But please find your best possible candidate for clerk and run there. If Kesmerick's running again, she is such a dumpster fire as the clerk. I got to feel like that's at least one opportunity we have as Republicans in a county that has been trending against us.
Bad news for you, Colin. The DuPage County audience turned this video off as soon as they saw my face.
Well, I think a lot of our audience does that, but hey, we keep you around anyways. All right, let's go to our second to last segment here. We'll do it fast. This is our news you can use segment where we go through a number of, whether it's legislation or news, things our audience should be aware of that you should be talking about. This one's a little bit interesting, more interesting for me. You three probably would just say I'm boring you with this topic, but we talk a lot about how property taxes are a problem in this state, and we talk a lot about how school districts are a big part of that. What we don't talk about is the fact that for many of these districts, a big part of the problem is the unfunded mandates from Springfield. They got to find some way to fund that. Their only option is raise property taxes. There were 2 bills in the last week that were moved forward that fall into this category. Senate Bill 1560 was a bill that on its face looks promising. I could see some positivity here that making sure young children have the mental health support that they would need. It requires screenings of every student at every school. There's no funding that comes with this. Every school district, especially smaller districts, are going to struggle with this, and they're going to have to hire new people. They're going to have to pay more money to make this happen. Where's that coming from? That's coming from your property taxes. So a bill that's, I'm sure, well-intentioned, but yet again, it's an unfunded mandate on school districts. Another bill that got a lot of attention is House Bill 3247. I don't necessarily want to get into a fight over the merits or lack of merits in that bill, but it ensures that if people are here illegally, their kids can at least still go to school. And obviously a lot of conservatives who have been fighting about spending tax dollars and non-citizens have a problem with that. My only focus in this specific topic is if those children have to go to school and the school districts have to pay for it, yet again, we're talking about another unfunded mandate on schools. And so anybody who votes for these bills, if you're a Republican, that's a direct vote to raise property taxes. And that's what we've got to focus on here is these unfunded mandates on these local school districts directly impact cost of living by raising people's property taxes. So that's why we call attention to them. I pause. Nobody has thoughts. Gave me a chance to smoke my cigar a little bit. Here we go. Let's go to the next one. Senate Bill 1784. This bill was filed, yesterday as an amendment to a current bill. And it would automatically seal criminal records. The individual who spoke about it, Rep. Jehan Gordon Booth, talked about how this would help 2.2 million Illinoisans by potentially sealing their criminal records. Again, in a state where down in Springfield, it's all about I'll just say it, the pro-criminal agenda. I know, Patrick, that might get you to roll your eyes, but all about the pro-criminal agenda. I mean, as an employer, I would happily hire somebody who's been rehabilitated and spent time in jail or done something wrong or been arrested, but I also would want to know about it, because if it's over something like some of the things that this covers are violent acts, I would want to know about that so I could make sure I could keep my employees safe. But under this bill, all that would be automatically sealed, and pretty quickly. Some of this is 2 years later, 1 year later, or immediately that these things would be sealed and we wouldn't have access to it. So it continues on that narrative of the Springfield's obsession with supporting criminals, not necessarily victims.
It's par for the course. I mean, there are instances where people who made a mistake when they were younger need a break and should be able to have records expunged or sealed more quickly. But yeah, I mean, the fact that violent or some really ugly stuff is in that bill is really troubling.
Well, and one thing I saw that I noted, just because I'm a messaging guy, they don't call it criminal justice reform anymore. It's just justice reform, as you see in that press release. And I've seen that a few times now. So again, we can't even call it criminal justice reform, even though that's what it is. It's now just justice reform, because you can't use the word criminal. I just sort of chuckle at that. Anyways, moving on. House Bill 2425 is another bill that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but it would force insurance companies to provide coverage to convicted felons. Now, of course, in its face, they're saying, well, everybody deserves a chance to plan for their final expenses, because in theory, this is about final expense life insurance policies. But if you look at the press releases and you look at the comments, there was a story in WAND from Adrienne Johnson out of Buffalo Grove, though this says Waukegan, but I think she's Buffalo Grove. Either way, says insurance companies should not be allowed to discriminate based on a felony conviction. I'm looking at that saying, okay, well, if you're talking about life insurance, there are plenty of felonies that someone could be convicted for that decrease their likelihood of living a long time. And so if you're a life insurance company, yes, you should be able to take that into account. Should they be able to deny coverage? Okay. I could see you doing a narrow version of this bill that says they still should be able to get coverage, but the fact is they're not even allowed to charge them more. They'd have to charge them the exact same amount. You can't take their criminal record into account when it comes to what you charge them or whether or not you give them insurance. So yet again, we've got a situation where all of us will pay more for our life insurance because of a subset of people who now can't be charged more, even though they're higher risk to die earlier. Again, just not a lot of common sense here.
Yet I eat a few too many cheeseburgers, and it's that much harder for me to get life insurance. Come on.
I mean, I think when it comes to life insurance, you should be able to take their life expectancy into account. That's the whole point. All right, couple last things here. Our friend Mark Batnick, who's been on the podcast a number of times, put out an excellent op-ed about funding of higher education. I was not aware of this, so this was news to me. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But in the state of Illinois, we are actually number one for spending on higher education. And yes, a portion of that is pensions, but even if you take out pensions, we are number 3 in the country in our funding of higher education. Yet all I've ever heard for years is underfunded. And that's why we've got all these problems. Batnick brought some pretty good details to the table. We fund per student $22,600, which is roughly double the national average. So I don't want to hear yet again that it's our higher education is underfunded in the state. His central argument, which I could see some understanding in here, is that we spend a lot of money and we don't get anything for the money we spend, which is very Illinois. As a matter of fact, that's his quote here. This is the Illinois model: spend more, get less, repeat. Solid point by our buddy Batnick. Certainly it deserves attention. So if you haven't seen that, pull up that op-ed by him. It's titled "Illinois is Paying Top Dollar to Fail Its College-Age Young Adults." Definitely worth a read and definitely worth a share. All right, last two here. Chicago has been downgraded to negative, their financial outlook by Fitch, talking about how Chris and his city, Chicago, and the city he believes is so expertly run by his buddy Brandon Johnson. Fitch has called them out for a lack of meaningful progress in closing their $1.1 billion structural budget gap. Chris, how do you feel about this? Your city's screwing up again.
Well, I just have one brief comment on this, and its relation to something else that has come out about Chicago is that crime is actually like significantly down right now. Like it was the safest Memorial Day in 16 years over the weekend. The problem with Brandon Johnson's administration is surprisingly not crime, like we kind of all expected to be. There are certainly still a crime problem in the city of Chicago that Brandon Johnson has terrible, terrible ideas for. But the problem isn't crime. It's the city's fiscal health is terrible. I mean, we're taking out Albanian mafia payday loans to pay for budgets these days. Like, that I wouldn't be surprised if we're at junk bond status pretty soon. Like, I don't live in the city of Chicago, but as someone who's who lives in Cook County and lives in the Chicagoland area, that's our city. That's where we're from originally. So it's sad to see the city of Chicago go in this bad financial straits.
Well, Chris, I'm just briefly, we'll push back on the whole crime thing because I've seen that posted by a number of people. I view this, people don't look at context anymore with issues. Like, yes, there are fewer crimes, violent crimes being committed in Chicago, but nationwide, that's what's happening. And you got all these press releases and these media headlines, crimes down in Chicago, and Brandon Johnson's like, yeah, see, look, what we're doing is working. It's just like the state of Illinois saying, look, our credit rating went up. It's like, no, every state's credit rating went up. We're still tied for last. Like, we don't look at context anymore. Yes, crime in Chicago is still higher than almost anywhere else in Illinois or in the country, but because crime went down everywhere, we're like, oh, look, we're doing such a good job. Like, no, you're riding a national wave. It's a national thing that crime is down. You can't say that that's Chicago doing anything right here.
Not disagreeing with you at all, Colin. I think you're 100% right. My point is more so that when a new mayor takes the reins over Brandon Johnson in 2027, I believe the winning messaging at this point is not necessarily centered on crime, though there's certainly a part of it. I think the winning message in the Chicago mayoral election or in Chicago politics in general is the city's fiscal health. I think we are, because in 2023 with Vallis, and I think crime was a bigger issue than the city's finances. I think that's swapped at this point.
That'll be interesting. There's a study I've been wanting to talk about. We don't have time today, but there's a study I've been wanting to talk about where people don't feel less safe, even though those crime numbers are down. And one of these days, we're actually going to get to talk about it. Patrick, you unmuted. Go ahead.
If voters really gave a damn about the city's fiscal condition, Paul Vallis would be mayor, right? And if crime were the issue that really pushed things, it would have polled better in 2022 in the gubernatorial race when you had outside PACs run by people who think they're smarter than everybody that continued to harp on crime and crime when it continued to poll terribly. So I think, I don't necessarily see either of these issues being what's moving voters right now.
Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll cue that up for a discussion over the summer when things are a little slower. Last topic here. I've been trying to do something that's more positive on the national side because we just don't message things nationally as Republicans. Michael in our internal Discord has posted a few what I would call junk polls that claim that we're rebounding in the economy, that voters are with us now on inflation in the economy. They're happy with Trump's tariffs. It's not from a reputable pollster, so Michael, I'm just teasing you here, but I'm not going to use that. However, our buddy John Giocaris posted this, and it raised to my attention, so I went and checked it out. The real clear politics trend of people who believe this country is on the right track versus being going in the wrong, or in the right direction versus going the wrong track, is nearly at a 16-year high. There was one little bump back in 2021, April, May, but other than that one little bump, it's the highest that it's been in 16 years of people believing that this country is going in the right direction versus the wrong track. Now, some clarity. Lane will bring it up on screen. Still, only 44% say we're in the right direction and 51% say we're on the wrong track. So we're still not above break even on that. But it is significant that what we're seeing is that all the headlines saying everything's awful, the sky is falling, the average voter isn't necessarily aligning with that. Though when everyone says everything's so awful, Pritzker or Finkston goes on his radio show and says that Trump's ruining the economy, the world's over tomorrow. The average voter, whether it's because they just don't pay attention to the media anymore or what, I don't know, but the average voter doesn't necessarily fully align with that. The fact that people feel like we're headed in the right direction at a higher percentage like this, that's at least significant enough to talk about. And by the way, it's been the trend for 4 months. It isn't like a one-time bump. As you can see in here, it's been going since January. So I do think it's relevant that the percentage of Americans that believe we're headed in the right direction is actually at a high, and that's something we should probably talk about. Though, not my job to defend Trump or national Republicans. They just got to get off their ass and do it.
I
All
think
right.
you're cherry picking polls a little bit. I mean, clearly consumer confidence is tanking. So it's not.
Well, that's the real Clear Politics average on the right track, wrong track. So
For
that
four
takes a bunch into
months.
consideration.
For 4 months. I mean, again, that's the point, that there are indicators, there are all sorts of things we can talk about that, yes, are problems. The average American seems to be tuning that stuff out, which is something we should probably be aware of. All right, let's go to our final segment, OG Clown of the Week. What do you guys got? I actually don't have a lot this week, so I'm hoping you guys have some fun, juicy things to add here, because I don't got much.
I've got a decent one. City of Alton, one of the employees forgot that they were logged into the official Facebook page and not their personal account. So they commented on this article where they tagged Governor Pritzker and said, look at what you helped do. You should be charged, you POS." So there's
And
been
it
a
was
lot of
under
fallout from that.
I'll have Lane bring that up on screen and post so people can see it, because, yeah, it was under the official City of Alton account.
Well, and then in the same week, the mayor of Alton endorsed Juliana Stratton for U.S. Senate. So I don't know if that was an apology endorsement or if that was really kind of how he was feeling. But
That's really
hey,
funny.
timing's interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. All right, good. That was good, Michael. Well done.
I'm going to go with former Governor Jim Edgar for OG, who
I expected this. I almost just like pass it to you right away.
he's my political Sherpa. What can I say? He's our moral compass in this state, and had a room dedicated to him at the Illinois State Library this week. He's battling pancreatic cancer. As a guy with good hair, Edgar has always loved his hair. His coif is poof, and it's gone currently, and he kind of came out in public for the first time with the bald dome, and I thought looked great, sounded great, had a great message about how government can be better and should be better. And I continue to hope and pray for the best for him as he continues to fight pancreatic cancer. I would also shout out all the staff that is putting in ungodly hours in Springfield right now, and not necessarily all being paid particularly well for it. I left a House Democrat office late last night, and there were a couple of young staffers still working there. I'm like, when are you guys getting out of here? And they're like, well, we haven't been released yet, but I've got a lot of work to do anyway. So they're being worked. Everybody's being worked to the bone, while politicians continue to dawdle. I would, if you want me to go clown, I'm going to probably just have to go back to the worst person in the world, Stephen Miller, who is trying to claim that there's a judicial coup in this country because judges, some of whom Donald Trump even appointed, are continuing to rule against him in court.
I mean, it's certainly part of the strategy. Kwame Raoul's making big headlines for these legal fights, and it's working for him, that's for sure.
My OG of the week is, as Plan Trusters will already know, State Representative Marty McLaughlin, for his lovely idea of Pope Leo XIV statue and license plate. I think this is wonderful, and I hope this legislation passes. And it just goes to show you that there is one main character religion in the world. It is the Catholic Church. We are going to get our statue of the Pope at the Illinois State House.
I mean, Chris,
he got mad at me yesterday because I referred to him as Freedom Caucus adjacent. Because he's showing up at all their events. Is that inaccurate?
No, I mean, every press conference, every event. I mean, he should just join the caucus. He's part of the caucus at this point.
I thought he did. Didn't he? No,
I mean, not officially.
I mean, but also Chris. So I can push back on you on this,
officially.
man. Like this is horrible. You're commercializing the Pope, and you shouldn't do this. You should do that. And now it's like, hey, they're making political hay about let's put a statue of the guy. And you're like, oh, this is really good.
Plate. A Pope license plate.
Yeah, the Pope license plate,
and something you're okay with.
Let's get our Cubs license plate and our Pope license plate for our cars, honey.
Boo, boo, Cubs license plate. We should get rid of that.
Something you're okay with it now, Chris.
This is why I voted for Dan Brady over Alexi Julius. He would have gotten rid of the Cubs license plates overnight. We would have had our Pope license plates.
Dan Brady is a Cubs fan.
I mean, not true. Fake news. CNN.
Listen, Chris, I'm just saying you're being a little intellectually hypocritical here. That when it aligns with, oh, I think that'd be cool, then you want it. But when someone else tries to commercialize the Pope, suddenly you're like, oh, this is horrible.
That's your
God
entire
forbid
MO,
Portillo's
Colin.
put out an Italian beef called the Leo. Like, come on, it's fun.
What is commercialization about putting a statue up? Like
The
what's
license
that?
plate.
The license
So
plate to pay for it is the commercialization of it.
so I think it'll be cool.
Are they selling tickets at White Sox Park for the Pope party?
Was that
I mean,
was that June 16th or whatever it is? I heard the Pope's going to do a video as part of it, which I think is kind of cool.
June 14th, which are the tickets go
14th.
on sale tomorrow, or at least they're
commercializing
available.
on sale? How
Right.
much are those tickets? How
It's
much
the
are the White Sox going to
Archdiocese.
profit?
It's the Archdiocese of Chicago.
Is it a White Sox event or a diocese event? I thought it was a White Sox event.
It's an Archdiocese event. It's literally you're going to be a mass.
And then he said, tickets go on sale. You just
I
said
don't know.
those words.
I don't know if they're on sale. All right.
Like,
Chris,
they're
are you
selling
going?
tickets. That's
Yeah, I'm going.
commercialization.
Yeah, I'm going.
God. All right, I got a couple. Oh wait, Michael, you already gave yours. Are you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, I only have a couple clowns this week, and they're not overly exciting, but I got to do them. Brandon Johnson for blaming all the problems in the city of Chicago on white supremacy. Listen of all these things that he said were, great in the city of Chicago, none of them being true, and then said all of that is risk right now because the type of damning animus disdain that white supremacy just can't get over that we're doing something right in a city. All right, buddy. Clown of the week again, permanent space in our Clown of the Week nominations. The pro-Palestinian radicals who were outside of the Israeli consulate just a few days after the murder of the Israeli couple, shouting "Free Palestine" and doing chants that were openly supporting Hamas while they burnt a U.S. flag and an Israeli flag. Come on, guys. Last thing here is. So NBC5's done a good investigation here in a situation where educators that were on leave out of CPS who had done some pretty awful things like grooming in Chicago got then immediately hired in Elgin. And then, of course, now they're being caught. So now they're being put on leave and being fired out of Elgin. But it opened up. I mean, obviously, there's a whole problem here with, you've been caught grooming in Chicago in schools. They should be not hired anywhere else. But it seems like there's a loophole here because there is a portal where they have to be put in if they're caught with this, but it takes a few months. And so Elgin hired these people and they weren't yet in that portal. You look at the story, if you read it out of NBC5, and like they were hired on this date. And then a few days later, they were put in the portal. So Elgin didn't even know about it. So there needs to be this loophole needs to be cleared because maybe it's not Elgin's fault. Maybe they didn't even know about this stuff, or they should have done their digging. But if there's a portal to track this, where if a teacher is caught grooming young kids in schools, another school district shouldn't even be allowed to hire that teacher. So let's get on that, lawmakers. Something you could actually do to make something better. All right, closing thoughts. We'll let Patrick go last as our guest. So I don't know, Chris, you annoyed me this week, so you go first.
Well, everybody, I hope everybody had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. We are now entering the summer. After this week, after this podcast, we're going to find out about the state's budget. It's probably going to be terrible. There will be much to talk about in the upcoming weeks. So thank you for tuning in this week, and hopefully we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
Michael.
I was just going to give a tip to all of our staffers out there. Make sure that you log out of your boss's Facebook account before you start doom scrolling, because the last thing you want is what happened to the city of Alton, where you call the governor a POS.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have like 50 or 60, maybe even more fan pages that I'm an admin of, and it's like, yeah, you have to be aware of that. Come on now, you've got to be smarter than that. Patrick, thank you for taking time out of your crazy schedule of sitting around waiting for something to happen. What do you got for us as your final word for the week?
It's a great reminder that $55 billion of our money is going to be spent by politicians this weekend in an increase by $17 billion in the last 7 years. $39 billion in FY19 to a proposed budget of $55 billion this year or next year. And it's a great reminder to ask ourselves, are we getting what we deserve from our government? If your answer is yes, then you're happy with the way things are. If your answer is no, then your next question should be, what the hell am I going to do about it? And certainly that means more than just posting shitty things about people on Facebook and politicians on Facebook and calling the governor fat. That doesn't do us any good. That doesn't do anybody any good. That doesn't improve discourse in this state. We need to elect better people on both sides. We need to have a real conversation about how to improve the state's fiscal health and make its spending more accountable uh, to the voter. And certainly gerrymandering has played a role in that. But I've had a lot of thoughts about this week. Not the, it kind of goes back to, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? But it's, are you better off with a $55 billion state government than you were 7 years ago when it was 39 billion? And do you feel particularly better off today? And I don't know that many people do.
Does this mean you're running for governor?
I mean,
hell no.
It sounded like a speech.
I mean, it was good. And Patrick, I would point to, this is something we've been talking about for a bit, which is poll after poll after poll have shown that the voters in the state aren't actually against the high taxes. They've sort of accepted we're in a high tax state, but where you can get them is, what are you getting for that investment? Republicans have been missing that. Conservatives have been missing that for a while now, that yes, cost of living is the big issue and taxes are part of that. But poll after poll after poll, I've got the taxes come in low, because in this state, it's not about the tax burden. It's what are we getting for it? And there's a huge lane there that Republicans could be owning. And so I hope they take your advice there to heart, Patrick, because I think you could even get liberals who would say, all right, yeah, do I think we're getting enough for what we're investing in? No, I don't think so. So it's a great point. I'll close with this. I had a heartfelt sort of focus on Memorial Day during last week on my OG. Well, anyone who's connected to me on social media will know that on Memorial Day night, a drunk driver went careening through our yard, smashed into my neighbor's garbage cans, and set the garbage flying throughout the road and the grass. Thankfully, I was still awake, so I went out there and cleaned it. But here's the kicker: our neighbor's a veteran, so some dumbass went out and got too drunk, drove and never should have, and then on Memorial Day smacked into the garbage cans of a veteran and sent the garbage flying everywhere. And if I hadn't done anything about it, that veteran would have been the early morning out there cleaning up trash all across the yards and the street. If that's you, if you're that kind of person, you got to rethink your life choices. Like, are we at that point now where just people are that big of idiots that on Memorial Day you're going to pull crap like that? Please be better. It's not politics, it's just life. We've devolved as a society and as humans, especially since COVID. Can we just be better people? It really would be nice. So I'll leave with that. As always, thank you to our guest and to Chris and Michael. Michael and Chris, Patrick, you guys are awesome. We'll be back next week with experts from throughout the state talking about what the hell is going to happen this weekend and what it means for you and your pocketbook, so don't miss it. In the meantime, go to the Illinois. Patrick Finkston will keep you up to date with everything going on over the next few days with emails and texts and social media posts and everything else. And we'll catch you next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.